What's up, Leafs fans, and welcome back to Leafs Digest. Last episode, we started to put together a list of the projected lineups that we could have. We ended up coming up with some interesting combinations of lines from our top, four lines through our top 6D, and then we pretty much had the same thing for goalies. But as the conversation went on, and as I thought about it more and more after the video came out, I started thinking about one guy in particular that we kind of completely left out of our list and we never even mentioned in the conversation, and it started to make me think about whether or not this guy was someone that we just dismissed, we forgot about, or if this is a guy who just has completely not earned a spot in the lineup this year, and that would be Timothy Liljegren.
Yeah, Timothy Liljegren is a guy who seems to have been buried in the system, but he's really good. I remember when we drafted him, we couldn't believe that he ended up falling to 17th overall. A lot of the projections had him going top 5. Bob McKenzie even said he was the third best prospect in the class, but mono, along with another injury, it really sidetracked his ability to integrate into the lineup, missed a bunch of games, all of this stuff. So we end up getting him at 17th. I think it's the steal of the draft. And by all accounts, he's been solid for the Marlies since we've picked him up. So he is definitely a guy that we need to mention in terms of the plans for this team moving forward.
Yeah, but Liljegren has been this one guy who I feel like ever since he kind of got into the lineup, he's been one of the, he's been the Leafs version of, I may have just beat this one to the ground in the past episodes, but the Bruno Caboclo of the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's the guy that everyone looks at and says he's 2 years away from being 2 years away. But I feel like that's an unfair determination of what Timothy Liljegren is as a player, because this is a guy that a lot of people look at and say, oh wow, he's been here for so long, he's so old, when is he going to be ready? When in reality, this guy was drafted in 2017. He's only 22 years old, and the reason people think he's been around for so long is because, yeah, it's not like this is his first time in North America, but the second he was drafted, he came over here and played for the Toronto Marlies. He played 44 games after the season right following his draft year, and he ended up winning a Calder Cup with that Toronto Marlies team. So yes, he has been here for a little bit longer than most people do, but that being said, we can't dismiss the fact that this guy came here and started becoming a pro at a very, very young age. So he's been in the Toronto spotlight, and this is a guy who's done pretty well since he's actually been here playing pro hockey.
Yeah, he has. And when you think about what the Leafs have needed, especially in recent past, a large right-handed defenseman who can score, or I guess put up points more accurately, which he's done for us, that's pretty much all the criteria we've wanted out of the draft in the past while. And you consider the fact that, he's been consistent since getting into the Toronto market, a lot of scrutiny, especially on defensemen. If he were to elevate his defense a bit more, and again, his defense isn't atrocious, but it's just not, screaming next level defenseman. If he can do that, then he probably does start to creep up into the lineup. But this is the last year of his contract. He's going to be an RFA. Starts to beg the question of, we at the trade deadline, being the Maple Leafs, are probably going to look to teams who are in win later mode, who are going to be the sellers. And at that point, does a player like Liljegren, who's got a lot of unproven upside, or I guess in some manners proven, is that a really good trade piece for us to put out there for teams to try and get something back that'll affect the big club this year?
To be honest with you, I think we need to see him play. I think we need to see this guy out on the ice, because we don't know whether or not he's a trade piece until we actually see him in an NHL lineup. The thing is that it's very easy to sit here and say, oh, if he goes to another team, he may become some super stud defenseman. And that being said, on the other hand, he may go somewhere and just absolutely get buried and never make it out of the AHL. But we don't know until we actually see this guy in an NHL lineup. And I think that it's very easy to look at it and say, yeah, we're in win now mode. And I would agree with people who would say we are in win now mode, so we need to move on from certain guys like that. But I would think also that, especially with him being an RFA at the end of this season, he's a guy that you keep around in order to not completely bury your franchise, if this makes sense. Is that when you look at a comparable guy to him on the right side, and it's a guy who slots in the 6D spot in Travis Dermott, who is actually a left-handed shot, is 3 years older, and he's playing in that right D, and he's not being a very consistent figure in terms of his quality of play. He's consistent in terms of we know what we're going to get from him, but in terms of overall quality of what he brings to the lineup, I don't think it's been that consistent. And if you give Timothy Liljegren an opportunity to get into this lineup and make contributions to the equal level that Travis Dermott is given and the equal opportunity that Travis Dermott is given right now, if he is able to do what Travis Dermott does, he's the guy I would much rather keep around because he's on a cheaper contract right now. He's an RFA and we have team control at the end of this season. And Travis Dermott is a guy who's on a cheap, valuable contract for at least the next 2 seasons, this coming season and the season following.
Yeah, that's all very true. And I'm starting to think, like, just from a hypothetical standpoint, if we're at the trade deadline, hopefully we're not at the trade deadline feeling pressed to bring in another guy because we feel like we've just got another big piece missing. But if we are in that situation, I almost think that you get more value shopping Liljegren just because, like you said, we know what we get with Travis Dermott. For worse or better, he's pretty consistent in our image of him. So teams really know the ceiling there. He's older. You get 2 years of term. But with Liljegren, he'll come as an RFA. You can lock him up to potentially a much longer contract. And he's got a lot more unproven upside. He's a little bit bigger. All these things. So I'm wondering if you're a team that's looking to, win later, so that's why you're selling at the deadline, is Liljegren a more enticing trade bait than Travis Dermott?
From the outside perspective, I would say yes, he probably is. From the internal perspective of the Leafs, I would much rather hold on to him. I think that just being at 6 foot, 192 pounds, a true right-handed defenseman who is an elite skater, a good puck handler, a good puck mover, and has been developing his defensive game over the past little while with the American Hockey League. Like, one thing I specifically look at is that in his 2019-2020 season where COVID struck and he had got called up to play with the Leafs for a little bit, he had 30 points in 40 games played with the American Hockey League. This is a guy who is developing his defensive game and is clearly capable of getting points, which in the long term, and I know it's a win now mode for the Leafs, but in the long term, and especially within the next 3 to 5 years, 5 years being the longest of that term, this is a guy that could potentially fill into this lineup moving forward. He could have, and I think he does have higher upside than a guy like Travis Dermott. So from the Leafs perspective, and I completely understand with what you're saying, is that another team looking at trading for pieces would want him. But from a Leafs perspective, I think he's a guy that you hold on to because part of our problem here too has been trading draft picks and moving on from all these picks. We haven't had that many guys coming back into this system. So when you do have these guys here, if you got to be certain that the rental you are going out and acquiring is either has like another year on his deal or will probably be returning to the team after the fact, because it was something we mentioned a couple episodes ago actually with the amount of guys that we've gone out and acquired at the trade deadline who just don't come back. The average games that these guys played with the Toronto Maple Leafs as a rental player was 13. Like, that's atrocious. So if we're going to go and move on from prospects, we have to be very, very careful of which prospects they could be, because yes, we understand that they're in win now, but you also need these guys because how else are you going to fill out your team at some point in the future?
No, that's all completely valid. And it is an interesting hypothetical to think about who would be the better trade piece depending on what you need. But in an ideal situation, the Leafs aren't feeling pressed for anything at trade deadline. Maybe we make a few subtle additions, do some of that. But at the end of the day, I do agree with what you're saying. We've handed out too much draft picks, lost too many guys in free agency. We're not bringing enough back into the future of the organization, even though we are in the win now mode. So yeah, I tend to think that at very least, you're going to want to give him some more ice at the NHL level this year, see what he can do, get a better gauge on what kind of player he could be long term at that level. And then that'll help you get a better idea of what the contract's going to look like, whether or not you would part with him, all of that stuff. But you're right. We're going to need to see him play this upcoming season.
Yeah, and I think more than anything, like, I understand what you're saying completely in terms of a trade piece that other teams would be looking for. If I was a team coming knocking at the door, I would much prefer to be trading for Timothy Liljegren than Travis Dermott, to be honest with you. But I just think internally as a Leafs ownership, Leafs management, I'd be saying, Liljegren is the guy you have to keep around because I think his upside is going to be higher than Travis Dermott's. He's also 3 years younger, so that there's your also team control, a little bit of youth, longevity here. Could be around for a little bit longer. But I do think in the meantime, the biggest thing that we have to do for this guy and with this guy is just put him in the lineup.
Yeah, I agree with you on that for sure. It definitely is sitting in my mind that if we need to make a deal, and again, I'm praying we don't, you know, that I'm pretty comfortable with our team.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm mad that we blew up like that. We can point to a bunch of situations where it's like, well, if that didn't happen or if that didn't happen, we probably would have been okay. But at the end of the day, no excuses for this group. We came up short. So I think we are close. We keep this group together, keep it going. I think we will have minimal issues. But if there is something glaring to address, he might need to be the piece that goes. I agree that I think it'd be smart to keep him long term. You need more players in that type of situation in the Leafs organization right now where they're young, they're coming up. They have valuable trade asset, they're a valuable trade asset, and they're going to be immediately impactful to your team if you decide to play them. But yeah, it's interesting hypotheticals. This is definitely something we want to be hearing about in the comments. What do you guys think that we should do with Timothy Liljegren? This is a guy who's easy to forget about, but really good.
Yeah. With that being said, I would completely agree with you, and I think that getting these guys into the lineup, these young guys who are on cheap contracts, entry level contracts, could be very good for this team. Could be very good for the cap situation. I mean, you look around the league and you look at teams that have guys on entry levels. Colorado specifically, with all those guys that are coming up, they've just signed. Some of them have just signed onto extensions, but having those guys in there gives the team a little bit of energy and youth and just excitement around it in general. And as Josh said, we want to hear what you guys have to say. What do you think the Leafs should do with Timothy Liljegren? Do you think he should be playing the lineup? Do you think he's a guy that should be traded right now? Or do you think he's a guy that should just be held onto and we wait and see what happens with him in the offseason next year? So as more debate continues on here and this offseason just slowly dwindles away and we work towards the beginning of regular season, we've got development camps, rookie tournaments that are going to get underway. We're going to start to work towards training camp. With all that coming up, Josh and I are going to have plenty more videos coming out. So make sure you like, comment, subscribe to our channel, whatever you got to do. Follow us on Instagram at Maple Leafs Digest. And yeah, Leafs fans, I'm excited about this season. I think that there's a lot of good things coming. I'm excited about this roster. Kyle Dubas has continued to make some moves, shake some things up, change some of his philosophy. So things have been good there. But let's get excited about this year. I know the offseason is slow, it's quiet, there's not many rumors surrounding anything. But Leafs fans, keep believing.
Signing off.